Hello and welcome to another Times Radio Frontline question and answer. Now today we're answering your questions and comments on Frontline episodes and other videos about the war in Ukraine and its impact on the world stage. I'm Philip Ingram. I currently present Times Radio Frontline, but I also commentate on all matters geopolitics, defence, cyber, terrorism and anything else that people ask me to. So, Peter Ayre's back. I'm going to delve into some of the questions that have come in. And first one comes from Marty. Marty, welcome back. Thank you. And you say, most of the front is now rather defined as grey zone, i.e. not fully controlled by either side, but contested. With drones in the air, also some Russian targets behind the front can get picked off, like of late, time and time again. How is the saying, don't stop your enemy from repeating their mistakes? Marty, you're 100% right. The front line is, I think it's changed the way we would define a front line. It used to be you had two militaries facing each other with direct fire weapons, which was the front line that was there, impacted by indirect fire weapons, mortars and artillery and rockets and all the rest of it, which spread it out over a wider area. But now those indirect fire weapons are drones. And we haven't got a linear front line. We've got a front line where there are little pockets of Russians that break through and then they can be surrounded by Ukrainians, and little pockets of Ukrainians who get completely surrounded by Russians. And therefore, it's spread out over a 10, 15, sometimes slightly more kilometre depth. And that makes it very confusing indeed, which is why we get lots of reports of breakthroughs and other reports of troops being surrounded and everything else. The one thing the Russians are doing where they're making a continual mistake is whenever they do break through anywhere, the Ukrainians sort of let them extend themselves, and they extend their lines of communication, the distances that are needed for resupply and everything else too much. Then the Ukrainians cut them off and then destroy them, as we saw just north of Pokrovsk, in the northern part of this cauldron that is being put around Pokrovsk. This is something the Russians do time after time after time, but it shows the lack of training and the lack of command and control that they've got. The Ukrainians can't exploit any opportunities they get whenever they cut these troops off and counterattack in, which shows that the Ukrainians, again, are having difficulty in getting the mass that's needed to create a momentum on the front line. So the front line has changed. It is all of a grey zone, and this is why I think this conflict is not going to be won or lost on what happens in the front line in the east. Randy, you provide the next question, and you say, during the Cold War, we had ground-based Tomahawk missiles. The launcher was the Gripen. Did we destroy these, or are they in storage? The US inventory is currently between 3,000 and 4,000 missiles. To keep the production lines operating, they need to make a minimum of 90 a month. The US military buys 50 to 60 a month. Surely there's no shortage for a country like the US. Well, Randy, first of all, welcome. I think you are. This is the first time we've had a comment from you. There are ground-based Tomahawk cruise missile launchers. I know that they were moved to airborne platforms and naval platforms primarily, because that suited the way conflicts were developing, rather than the ground-based capabilities. Of course, we go back to the good old days of nuclear armed Tomahawk cruise missiles being based in Europe. And I remember in Greenham Common in the UK, there were ground-based launchers that were there. So you're 100% right. I understand there have been new launchers developed, and they're sitting in production. So there's going to be no shortage of that. US inventory is about right. Production lines, again, they wear out. The older ones have to be used or taken away and virtually rebuilt. US military is buying them. Your question ties in with one that's coming later, and I'm going to bring that in now, and it's from Lars. And Lars, you say, why do you keep saying that Trump is thinking of sending Tomahawks to Ukraine? It's about sales, and Europe pays the price of $1 million each. So some $100 million would barely last a month. The same goes for PAC-3, and you're talking the Patriot, anti-aircraft missile, and anti-missile missile. Europe has to pay for Trump's support for the US industry. And that ties in with what Randy was saying. And Lars, you're 100% right. But $1 million each. It's interesting. I formally asked the Americans at one stage how much does a Tomahawk cruise missile cost, and they said there is no fixed price. For some people they get it for free. For other people, we'll charge them $1.2, $1.5 million. And we'll make a bit of a profit on it. So I don't know what Europe is going to be charged, but whilst those sums to you and I sound eye-wateringly large, when you look at the wider budgets and you look at the amount of money that's been contributed to Ukraine already, and you look at the budgets of the European nations, it's not. It's small beef. It's loose change down the back of your sofa, and therefore Europe could easily pay the United States to increase its Tomahawk missile production capability in the way that Randy's saying, and replace some of those 3,000 to 4,000 missiles if a large number of them are sent to Ukraine. However, any decision on that has been put back until after the meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin in Budapest, hopefully within the next 2 weeks. So next point comes from Walter. Walter, you say you agree with Scott Lucas. Trump didn't say no, and that must be good. Walter, you're 100% right. And Trump didn't say no, and in fact, Trump did turn around after his meeting with Zelensky and say he could be being played by Vladimir Putin. So I think there's a realization by Donald Trump that Putin has got a little bit too much of his own way. We'll see what happens after Budapest. From my perspective, it's important that you give talking a chance, because military action, war, is only diplomacy by other means. And it's setting the conditions to get people around the table and talking again. So if delaying delivery of Tomahawk cruise missiles, or a decision over giving them, is giving talking another chance, that can be a good thing. But I suspect Vladimir Putin is going to take the P ever so slightly, and we'll see his increase in attacks on civilian targets in Ukraine, energy infrastructure targets in Ukraine, as we've seen beforehand in the run-up to this Budapest meeting. And that, if Melania Trump continues with the comments that she did before Alaska, before and in the same vein before Budapest, if that's what Putin does, then Donald Trump may arrive there already not seeing Putin in as favourable a light as Putin would like to be. I think the whole thing is symptomatic of Vladimir Putin being worried, but we'll bring that out in more questions. And then final question is from Steve. And Steve, you say Tomahawks are too expensive. The Ukraine can build Flamingos for a third of the price. If the EU stepped up, then maybe they are, but making 30 to 50 Flamingos a day would not be hard, would it? Well, Steve, I'm not sure what the Flamingo production line's like, but I agree with your sentiment to a degree. They are very different. You may need 4, 5, 6 Flamingos, even though they've got a longer range and a bigger warhead, to have the same effect as one Tomahawk, because the Tomahawk is exceptionally accurate and is very stealthy. You can decide which window, in fact, you can decide which pane of a window you fly a Tomahawk through. I don't think the Flamingo is that accurate. And therefore, whenever you're having an explosive effect, if you get your structural engineers to decide exactly where in a bridge something needs to be hit. Not that I'm suggesting a bridge could be a target. The Tomahawk cruise missile, you can have it directly there. And because of its stealth and the way it flies, you've got a chance of getting more Tomahawks there through Russian air defences than you would have with the Flamingo missiles. So it's another club in the weapons golf bag. The other thing that Tomahawk cruise missiles bring, which Flamingo doesn't bring, is a psychological impact. And that's at the political level, because it's showing a level of support from the United States and a level of commitment from the United States to Ukraine that really worries Vladimir Putin. Flamingo doesn't do that. So, a good point nonetheless. Thank you all for your points and comments. Remember, if you want exclusive access to our videos early and to get your questions and points answered, please sign up for Times Radio membership. And of course, you can get us now on your podcast channels or podcast outlets by just searching for Times Radio Frontline. Thank you. Goodbye.